welcome back. We look forward, Be'ezras Hashem, today to continue. This is where we left off last week. I will just say it as I said it last week regarding the previous class, that you really have to appreciate the class before in order to understand the present, because it's detailed, it's a concept that we didn't learn before, at least thoroughly, which Alter Rebbe is introducing over here, all based on this pasuk Valibash Tzedakah Kishiryain, that he invested himself like tzedakah, or rather with tzedakah, like a coat mail, which has these gaps, and then they have these coverings which cover these gaps, these scales, if you will, which cover the gaps. And there's the simple meaning of the Gemara, which speaks about the relationship with Am Yisrael with Hashem, that Hashem was Leivish Stoka Kashiryain, the Kovi Yeshua Bereishay, a hat of deliverance, literally translated in his head, which is referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachol. And Alter Rebbe has a whole beer over here, a whole explanation what the advantage of tzedakah, that not only Hashem dealt with his people in a kind way, in a charitable way, if you will, but it speaks about the virtue of tzedakah with its association with the shiryain, with that parable, with that example, where the pasuk is referring to, which is this coat mail, as it's called, which has these gaps and these scales covering these gaps. So the Alter Rebbe introduces to us this idea of every mitzvah being Ratzon Ha'elyon. I really shouldn't even repeat everything. You have to just see the previous classes in order to understand the present. So let's really go straight into it over here. So this idea, it's okay to repeat that from where the mitzvah comes from, the Ein Sof itself, the highest levels of the unfiltered, if you will, Ein Sof, B'chvei V'atzmei, Hashem's infinite energy. That's where the mitzvahs come from. They're Ratzon Ha'elyon. How does the Yid able to connect to it? So there, from that area, there's a lavush, a garment. We gave that analogy of the injection again, all in the previous class, the class before. You probably do both classes again to understand the present. I believe this is the first one, namely the second, the third. Better even start from the first and the second and third in order to thoroughly appreciate the present class. So from there, again, we use the injection analogy. You take from the issue and you inject it in order there should be that immune system, the body should be immune, it should be overwhelmed, but something chas v'shalom could be catastrophic. And in this case, lahavdil, we're talking about the overwhelming presence of the Ein Sof, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there can't be really anything which could ever contain that in no level, in no form or fashion. Nothing finite could even be in the face of the infinite. It's just impossible, as we explained many times, and it's just common sense. If something finite cannot be in the presence of the infinite without disappearing, literally. It doesn't even have a starting chance, a starting point, because it's overwhelmed by the infinite. So how does a Yid, which eventually becomes the Nivra, we explained it as well, and how does he appreciate Bayrei, creator, but in this case not only creator, as Hashem contracts himself, as he does, through, say, the Ishtalshlus. In the end of the day, Malchus is an important point, becomes Malchus Chamalchus Kolilamim, Eilam Malashon Helav Hester, as we mentioned many times. But the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how could a neshama appreciate the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which it should, because it connected to that area, doing the mitzvahs. By doing the mitzvahs are Ratzon Ha'elyon, the supreme desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that's the Hatayas HaNefesh of Hashem, mitzvah Sai. That is the Ein Sof. So how does a neshama appreciate the Ein Sof? It's an impossibility by definition. So Hashem takes from the Ein Sof and engarments the neshama with a lavush, with a garment, in order that it should be able to have some type of appreciation of the Ein Sof. Similar to the Moshe, Moshe B'Secha Onan. The Onan wasn't just a place, which again we mentioned this last week, and Alter Rebbe has this exact analogy or exact idea conveyed, where he expands on this with Pei Chav Tes. Again, we didn't learn it yet, but it's easy to access 29 in Igeres HaKodesh in this segment which we're learning. We're learning the third epistle, it's the 29th. So the Alter Rebbe brings it there that Moshe Rabbeinu went into the Onan. The Onan was the lavush, a garment for Moshe Rabbeinu to enclose himself or enclose himself, and in order to appreciate the Anhai, with areas where Moshe entered to. There is a malachim, and more closer even Be'inarech to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, taking the Torah, which is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bringing it down to Am Yisrael, bringing it down to the world, and so on and so forth. How does Moshe Rabbeinu, despite Moshe is a Ish Elikim, a godly person, but nonetheless he's an Ish, how is he able to connect or ascend to that level? And the answer, Hashem, from that very level, Hashem established a lavusha garment, which was the On, via the Moshe B'Seich On, and via the On, and he was able to appreciate the Anhai. So too, as we learned, Alter Rebbe, we learned in the last two classes basically, that there's a lavush comes to that very area, in garments that encloses the neshama, and the neshama through that could have a appreciation in the areas of the Ein Sof. However, Alter Rebbe writes, this is the final place we left off last week, this cannot be in this, all this appreciated in this physical world. Only in Gan Eden it can. And we even asked the question, Gan Eden is also an Eilam, so how, which is Mugbal, and it's a world which is limited by all definitions. If it's a world, especially Elam Abriya, which is very far from even the experience of Elam Atzilus. Elam Atzilus is also an Eilam. It's not the purity and the ultimate purity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu K'Meshahu, the way Hashem is formed so binding. It's an Eilam Atzilus. Again, just recapping quickly what we learned last week. But this is even less, and significantly less. We mentioned many times, it says in Kabbalah Chassidus, the real gap is from Atzilus to Bria, and that's where the Gan Eden Elyon is. A Yitzir is the Gan Eden Tachtin. So these areas, how, in essence, like what's the difference? Of course, there's a difference between Elam Asiyah and Elam Yitzir and Elam Abriya, but why is it that there you can have a no from the presence of the Ein Sof, even via that lavush? If it doesn't work in this world, as the Alter Rebbe explains, it's not possible. As we learned last week in detail, why should it work up there? So we learned last week, in the end of the day, there is an enormous difference. We gave the analogy that Moshe Rabbeinu can go to the unknown because he's Moshe Rabbeinu. Any other person would not be able to necessarily would not be able to appreciate what Moshe appreciated on high. Again, in an area in the turf of the Malachim, and higher than that, Be'inarech with HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, anybody else probably and would not be able to, even via the unknown, because you have to be a Moshe Ishalikim, and there ought to be a starting point. He's Moshe Ishalikim, so he can go B'Secha Onan, and he could appreciate the Anhai as opposed to an average person. And this similar idea, because this is the Nadir level of finiteness. Therefore, there's no starting point in this world, even with the Lavush, to appreciate the Ein Sof. Dafka Elam Abriya, Elam Yitzir, Elam Abriya, which is divested of any image which can exist in the Elam Hazeh. It's transcendent of time and place, certainly the time and place that we know it over here. Is it absolutely transcendent of time and place? Of course not. Alter Rebbe writes in the Shaykh B'Munah that the phenomenon of time, again, not the unfolding of time the way we have it in this world with the maximum limitation as we know it is time, space, and so on, but subtly it initiates in Malchus of Atzilus. Of course, Malchus of Atzilus, the way it becomes the Reish L'Shuolim, becomes the source of all elements. That's where it begins, but it's, of course, there it's in a total different level. But at least the starting point, the initiation of this phenomenon of Zman Makim, Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimlech. And in Bria, of course, there is some type of Zman, somewhat, but there's no comparison to the way it's down here in this world. No comparison at all. That matter we mentioned, the person before he goes to Gan Eden, he has to forget Chesed HaYalma. There can't be even any image in someone's mind of whatever goes on in this world when he enters in Gan Eden, because that's a different ambiance. It's a very holy ambiance, a transcendent ambiance. And therefore, in Yitzir, namely in Elam Abriya, there could be You pay, you reward each one based on what their deeds. In other words, they could appreciate there, of course, via the levush. Without the levush, it wouldn't work, because finite in the face of infinity just doesn't, it can't exist. But through the levush, through that garment, the neshama is able to have anah from the Ein Sof, to which it connected to in Elam Hazeh, in this world, by doing all the mitzvahs. Well, the mitzvahs is ratzonali, and many times, put on tefillin, mezuzah, the entire lifetime of a yid is always connected like once in a while. Oh, let's find out what we get for that once in a lifetime reward. Idea that I did. If it's a bris or it's something special, as an example. No, it's every day we do mitzvahs. Every day we connect to that ratzon. Every day we're privy to that, in essence, to that gili of the revelation of the infinite Kodesh Baruch Hu. But la'ata teshal mishkim masei is only in the world to come. Now, Mashiach comes, b'chaim nitzchim, but as the Alter writes in Kuru Kodetei, this world itself will be sublimated and elevated to a state of Priyei Tzadas and beyond. So, as the Alter writes, Priyei Tzadas, even this world, was similar to the ambience of Olam HaAtzilus, which is it is extraordinary expression of the Alter Rebbe. It needs to be understood, but yeah, it will be Chaim Nitzchim, so we will be able to then have that garment, which, because this world itself will be elevated from its Hagbala, from its limitation, from its intense finiteness, and therefore there would be a possibility also through even a levush in this world, the way things are regularly, this Schara Abad Mitzvah B'Hayal Maleka, only there in the world to come. And again, we explained also, as the Alter Rebbe explained, Kibel Mazal Gashmi, if you remember, after he quotes Schar Mitzvah B'Hayal Maleka, and he goes on, Ba'il Mazal Gashmi, Ba'al Gvul, it's not Shaykh, whatever we learned last week, again, a click away, wherever you're watching it, you could see the previous class. But it's easier to access on the original website, the tanyaonline.com. And again, all the previous classes, including these very last classes, are on the left side. It's easy, and it's easy to follow. We mentioned also the time and again that there's a separate scroll bar for the text as such. Again, easier to follow. So the previous classes, it's so easy to access them on this original website. TanyaOnline.com and so we go on. So with Alter Rebbe's message this year, this is where we left off last week. Excuse me. We left off last week that there's certain mitzvahs with the Torah itself says that you're getting the reward in this world. We say it every day in davening. Mishnah Peyu, Elo Dvarim, Shayil Adam Echel Peiris Seim Elam Hazeh. V'Keren Kayamas Le'Lam, the principle will always stay in the world to come, but we eat Echel Peiris Seim, we eat of its fruit, which means we tap in to the energy of the mitzvah, even in this physical world. So on one hand, Torah promises. In other words, when Torah promises something, it's not like, it's a wishful idea. When Torah says, Torah's emes, which is the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's what Torah is, every part of Torah. And Torah says that the certain mitzvahs you'll be eichel perisei be'elam hazeh, so that's the way it is. Conversely, of course, we have to understand, how is it possible? We just explained till now that it is impossible, based on the entire presentation of the Alter Rebbe up till now, and it makes so much sense and it resonates perfectly in this Chai Mitzvah B'Hayal Maleka. So we have this dichotomy. One hand, we know clearly that doesn't make sense. The other hand, Torah promises us, because if Torah says Elu Dvarim Sheichel Torah Semel Mazeh, so that's what it is. But the question is, how does it work? So here the Alter Rebbe writes, continues this where we left off, and with this he draws this, and he explains the pasuk. Aval yilbash staka kishir yain, which staka, as we know, is one of the mitzvahs that a person benefits in this world. In other words, the reward is given to him in this world for the paytas. Even it doesn't take away from the fact that the principle remains in Elam Haba, but a person who gives staka, he's able to benefit from the peitis, which means from the energy of tzedakah, and the question is, how does it work? So here, the vayilbach tzedakah kashiri, and this is what the pasuk is saying, that there's openings, and then there is the scale, the same scale with clothes, which is the analogy of the coat which one wears when he goes out to battle, in order that there shouldn't be any arrows which chas v'shalom could harm him, because these gaps close, and when they close, the person remains unharmed. And here the Alter Rebbe says, what happens is, it opens, the window to the Ein Sof opens up, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu extends his Ein Sof to the Yid. And of course he would do it with a lavush, but in the end of the day, Hashem promises that it's going to happen when you will give tzedakah. You'll to be tuned in. Anything you're ever tuned in into this, any other mitzvah you do, again, if it's not the mitzvahs which are mentioned in the same Elu Dvarim, which Torah promises, if you see the commonality of all these mitzvahs are about one's extending himself, all in the idea of tzedakah, and of course there's others, but you see over here how precious it is by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the idea of kindness, and this is a base of Kol HaTorah Kula. We have it so many places, not to go off, but just to understand the spirit, why these mitzvahs are so special, that Hashem is so special that Hashem is ready to do something so grand, to open a window of the Ein Sof even to a Yid, which is in this very physical, finite world. Yes, because loving another fellow as yourself is a klal gadol b'Torah. Hillel says, this is Kol HaTorah Kula v'idach tirushu. The old Torah isn't a commentary on that, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us, in the end of the day, to lose ourselves in tzedakah. In other words, to understand the profundity of this mitzvah, that in the end of the day, I'm just a messenger of Hashem when He gives me wealth in order just to extend it to the people who He Himself created. For whatever reason, Hashem establishes the world as a giver, as a taker, but this is the way it's established. Hashem's people are sitting right there, coming to your door, or you know where they are, and He's giving this to you in order to give it to them. And this is your holy mandate to do so. And again, so much is written about tzedakah, but not to forget something that important of in the way it fits so perfectly in the bigger picture, why Hashem created the entire world, to establish a dira b'tachtein, a dwelling place in the HaKadosh Baruch Hu's in a dwelling place in this physical world, and how tzedakah is a mitzvah which accentuates that energy of what exists behind the mitzvah, the way it fills the entire image, the entire plan, master plan of creation, as the Alter Rebbe, and again, it's worth to go in Perek Lamed Zayin, in Likutei Amorim, the first segment, we mentioned, this is the fourth, presently, we are learning the fourth segment of Sefer Tanya. In the very first, which is Likutei Amorim, Perek Lamed Zayin, the Alter Rebbe points out why tzedakah accomplishes in again to bring to fruition the master plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in having this world a dwelling place for Him via the Yid, for Hashem Yisbarach, via the Yid. And he explains so carefully why tzedakah does that so much more than any other mitzvah. And again, that's why tzedakah will always remain a centralistic mitzvah, vis-a-vis any other mitzvah. He even reconciles that with Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, which we learned in the same Mishnah. The Talmud Torah precedes every other mitzvah, but he explains it there also. He asks the question, but in the context of establishing for HaKadosh Baruch Hu a dwelling place, an abode in this world, tzedakah is the mitzvah. So we can understand, again, I'm just mentioning it, there's in Torah Shabbal Peh, in Torah Shabiksav, and in Torah Shabbal Peh, and Medrash, which would include Medrashim, and Gemara, and all the sayings of our holy sages of blessed memory regarding this mitzvah. Of course, you could write many books even to understand why tzedakah becomes is such a central mitzvah throughout all Torah. So, just to get back in here, I'm just mentioning this just to understand why tzedakah is adam and the pasuk itself explains how it's going to work, because tzedakah is a very significant, vital mitzvah, and we should not make little of it or to try to, I'm doing all these other mitzvahs, forget about tzedakah for today, for tomorrow, for this week, for this month, and so on. No, tzedakah will always remain a central mitzvah. So back to the analogy, when you look at the shiryain, it's a coat which is meant to shield the individual who's wearing it at times of battle, times of war, that chas v'sholom, no arrow should enter. And there, it's open, and then it has the scales which covers the opening. So the time of openings is of course a benefit. The individual doesn't want to wear something which is totally closed in. So there's some advantage when it's open, but he gets onto the battlefield, of course all those scales go closed in order that chas v'sholom, an arrow should not penetrate. Anything shouldn't penetrate from the adversary. So the Alter Rebbe says this is exactly the way it works. Had the window to the Ein Sof be opened fully without any interruption, nothing would ever be able to exist. Nor the Yid, nor the Yid did tzedakah, nor is it a reward for his tzedakah that he gave, because in no time everything would be swept into there wouldn't be any synchronicity which between the Ein Sof and the world, and particularly even this Yid who did the mitzvah. And this body has a chelik of the kamimal mamash, but not which is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we mentioned many times why, as the Alter Rebbe writes there, in the end of the day, neshama becomes a nivra, nothing close to any other nivraim, created beings by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's just he goes through the channels of the bria. All Olam is explained in Pei Beis in Likutei Amarim, the second chapter, click away in Likutei Amarim, the first segment, and later in so many other places, namely in Pei Chav Tes, as the neshama itself adapts, and in Geras HaTshuva famously, that it adapts in the end, especially when it invests in an animal soul in the body. So there's a nivra dimension to it, so as a nivra able to appreciate Beirei. But conversely, Hashem promised that you're going to have the benefit in this very physical world. Beirei is in Be'olam Hazeh. So the pasuk says, through the tzedakah, the window opens up, and you get, and the Ein Sof comes through. But if the Ein Sof comes through, it could really rock the boat, because, again, explained many times, that once there's an opening, besides the fact that everything would be swept into the Ein Sof, and even HaKadosh Baruch Hu has his ways that it should not immediately be swept in when the window opens, because by all definitions, what does it take? Time. You're talking about something in place with transcendent of time and place, and when that window opens, everything should really be consumed into the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu established that it shouldn't, but nonetheless, we'd say it would cause disorder, because once there's a window to the Ein Sof, there's other negative energies which can tap into that enormous energy and aggrandize themselves. It causes chaos and disorder in the whole system, as we can understand from many areas. Alter Rebbe alludes to it in different, very briefly over here. But once that window is opened up, of course, there's the loss of order. There's the gradual order, as known as Seder Ishtalshalos, and everything is with a cheshbon, with a calculation, and someone's closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu receives more, further than HaKadosh Baruch Hu is set aside, but and has less, and generally the ambiance in an area which is not aligned with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or even further than that, associated with Klip and Sitra Achra, everything is really removed from the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because there is an order. Perhaps saying this with brevity, but nonetheless, we can understand that when the window to the infinite opens up, which there is kachashecha ka'ira, there is no order, because there darkness is like light, like it says in the pasuk in Tilim, or the famous in Tzadaktim Atitim Le'Brab B'Shechem Atasla, the Ace of Achesav Liyaakov. There's no darkness, doesn't have any significance. Light doesn't have any significance. It's just the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Light, which means the way it's measured in Olam Hazeh. This whole order doesn't exist. So when you open that window, everything wants to gain its energy and ultimately its aggrandizement, and then it causes chaos, and it could disturb, and it can disturb, and it does disturb the orderly, and in this case the Yid, Rahman al-Islam, serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, could be damaged if it's opened too much, because right now it rises, the negative energies rise to an area that they feel they are able to gain control, because they just got enormous dosage of the Ein Sof. Why are they getting from the Ein Sof? Because in the area of Ein Sof, kachashecha ka'ira, darkness is light. There's no calculation there. So then they could, chas v'shalom, do harm. It says, for example, by Haman, we mentioned it in the past, why do you say Yasu Eitz Govoya 50 Amo? That the gallows should be 50 Amo. What if it's 48 Amo? why does he underscore in or emphasize the measurement of the gallows? Maybe 60 amma. So it says a number of places. 49 is still associated with, say, the ishtalshalus, the order of the chain, literally translated. 7 times 7, 7 is like the cycle of the week, and so many numbers, areas in the number of 7, or so many examples associated with 7, with deals with the order of creation. Of course, starting from the 7 days of creation. 7 times 7, 49. Again, this is all explained in Kabbalah and Chassidus. 50 is L'mayla Meseder Ishtalshalus. Higher than the order. Higher than order means that someone like Haman feels and knows that within the order, I have no chance, because these are people who are subservient to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the source of all blessings, the source of all life, and the source of everything what happens. And they learn Torah, and they have Mesidus Nefesh, and especially that year they had a full year, men, women, and children, a complete devotion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which was even it meant to sacrifice their life for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They were ready to do so for an entire year. So they're so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And where am I? I'm Haman, which is so distant from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he realized, there's no chance for me to override, to be able to execute my plan in obliterating this nation, which is so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Impossible. So what does Haman say? Let's go to an area of L'mayla Meseder Ishtalshalus, higher than order, in a place where Kachashecha Ka'ira. Why should darkness, in an area of Ein Sof, true infinity, why does darkness have a less priority over light? Kachashecha Ka'ira. It's an area when darkness and light is exactly the same, because if it's not exactly the same, it's not truly infinite. The Alter Rebbe has in Perek Mem Ches, it's an idea. It doesn't say it exactly in these words. So to say, if infinity is excited by something great, or let's say numbers, if his infinity is excited about 1 trillion, and it makes an impact on infinity, and of course over a billion, or over 1 million, over 1,000, or even over 1, which is Bein Arayich, 1 to 1 trillion, if you can say it. I mean, you can't really say Bein Arayich, because the trillion's main name is ultimately of a combination of ones, but nonetheless, it's all the way up there. And if infinity is excited of the trillion over the 1, it's not truly infinite. Because in the face of infinity, trillion and 1 is exactly the same. That's the definition of infinity. And the same thing you're talking about in denomination, but you're talking about light and darkness. If it's impressed with light over darkness, so it's not truly infinite. And that's why Haman feels Yasu's Govei 50 Amma, 50 Amma beyond it, say the order. And that's where I stand a chance. As it's explained in Kabbalah and Chassidus. Thus the precision of that number, which Haman demanded that gallows reach that level, because he knows that's the only chance he has. Now, why didn't he succeed? Because at the end of the day, Aches of Yaakov, but he said, hey, Yaakov. The Eirus Yaakov is Esav Sanesi. Yidden are rooted much deeper within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yidden are part of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, which is explained again in the discourses Chassidus Chabad regarding this whole subject of Haman and the story of Purim. But in this similar idea, when this window is open, well, this can cause a lot of chaos. As we can understand, Alter Rebbe again writes these few words. So what does Hashem do? Hashem immediately closes it, puts the scale on that loop. In order, chas v'shalom, on one hand, there's let the individual get his reward. And then, before any chaos could establish itself, it closes it right away. So what remains is that this individual gets his schar in Elam Hazard from that infinite. And it's also not open too much in a way, because in this world it's impossible to be tuned in directly to the Ein Sof, as the Alter Rebbe explains. There has to be Yichud Kutsha B'Richos Shchinta. It has to go through the Eilamis, and starting from Eilam Atzilus, as we learned last week, again, a click away. As opposed to here, that there is the opening to the Ein Sof itself. It cannot be in this physical world, certainly not for any lengthier period. So literally, it's a moment open, but Hashem immediately closes. That the tzedakah causes, on one hand, there's the opening directly to the Ein Sof. Conversely, chas v'shalom, there shouldn't be any negative consequence to that. immediately, same Syrian, the idea that it closes, that Hashem closes right away that gap. So what can we appreciate? That the person who does receive his energy from this Ein Sof, with that opening, whoa, it reflects an enormous and abundant, disproportionate taiv, disproportionate good in all areas of life. He sees bracha and atzlacha beyond his imagination. We learned the other day by Yitzchak Meir Sha'arim was like, it's not just like a little more, a little better. And in all areas of life. In Bana Chayim Mezene, and in all Revicha V'Kol Revicha, like the expression, well, this is the message over here, in life and in children and in wealth and in Parnasa, livelihood. There's enormous bracha which is reflected immediately when this window opens up, as we can all understand, because if it's Ein Sof, it's Ein Sof. And then of course Hashem closes it. Kasiryen, in order chas v'sholom, there shouldn't be anything negative transpiring in this world, and to the person himself who just appreciated and got that energy from Ein Sof, to shield him. And that's very similar to the way it is in the physical. The reason why one would put on this coat, this type of coat, it's called the coat mail. The reason why they close it, chas v'sholom, an arrow should not be able to penetrate and harm the person. So it's immediately closed. Thus the precise similarity to the way it is in the physical realm of the actual shiryan to the message which Al Tareb is conveying over here. So let's see it inside. Let's remember where we left off. The Ilazais, I believe the Ilazais is page 208, and it's 5 lines from the top of the page in the original text, wherever you're watching the corresponding English text, or anyway you're following. So the Ilazais, but Ma'aseh Hatzdaka, when it comes to tzedakah, charity, charitable acts, or gemilas chasadim, or extension of kindness. What's the difference? Of course, there's charity, and you learn in halacha. Or gemilas chasadim, there's different ways. A person is goyim el chesed. He extends kindness to the one in need. Sha'odam, the Torah promises eichel peres emel mazeh, that he eats from its fruit in this very physical world. Yesh nekovim al derech moshe b'lvusha elyein hamakif al gufa. There are perforations in the supreme garment which surrounds the guf. What is the guf? We learned last week. The kelim of Yitzviris, the containers of Yitzviris, which normally everything has to go through these kelim. So there's the garment which encompasses these kelim. And this lavush comes from, like we learned from the Ein Sof, from the area of the Ein Sof. And again, we learned this idea that everything in this world connects to those kelim of Yitzviris. So there's the Yichud Kutchabrichu, which is the Ein Sof, but it had to go through the Shchinte, which is again starting from the Kelim of Yitzviris. You have to see the last week's class to understand this perfectly. So in this, when Torah promises that these mitzvahs you are benefit in this physical world, there are openings, there are perforations, similar like the Shiryain. There are gaps in this supreme garment which surrounds the guf, which is the Kelim Yitzviris, the Kelim Yitzviris, like we learned last week. Lahoir mehem, to shine from them, the ulashpia erbeshefa, and to extend light and energy and ashpa mechesed drei yamina, from the right, from the kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the right hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oirich yomim beilam hazeh gashmi, long days, and longevity in this physical world. V'oisher v'chovod, riches, honor, midrei asmala, from the left of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like it says, Eirich yom bimino u'v'smeila sheverkabed. As we say it a few times a week, we take it by the Sefer Torah, as we know. Eirich yomim, in the V'zeis Torah, and the V'zeis Torah is the mission of that. Eitz chaim milvah zimgvav zechai Moshe, Eirich yom bimino u'v'smeila sheverkabed. That the Eirech Yamim, longevity, comes from the Yamin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the wealth and the covet comes from the left of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there is still the questions what you would ask, where's there's right and left? You're talking about the Ein Sof. No, it still connects. Again, there's a different how something connects to the Kalim of the Yutzvidis? Is it a inner connection or it's an external connection? And a simple example, someone says, they were in Italy as an example. There's two ways of looking at it. Or you were in Italy because you came to Italy. That was one of your places you were meant to be, and that was your destination. You were meant to go there for a day or two or a week or so. Or somebody goes from one place to the other and there's a stop in Italy. So is it correct to say, I was in Italy? Yeah, you were actually in Italy because your plane stopped there and you were on the turf and on the ground of Italy. But you can't really say that you were there. It's a difference, of course, a total difference, even though physically, externally, you're both in Italy. You're both there because your plane, in the end of the day, landed on the ground, which is the geographically, this is Italy. But nonetheless, an hour later you took off, or you just changed planes, so you weren't really there. What I'm saying is that, of course, there's the difference of receiving directly from the Kalim Diyut spheres, which is the norm in Eilam Haz, as we learned last week, and again, we learned it in detail. So, as opposed to here, yes, it's not that in the Keser, in the area of the Ein Sof, there's Yamin and Smile, even though, of course, subtly there is, especially in Arich. And in Atik we find in Kabbalah the Yutzviris, the Sheva, the Shalish Yeshenas, the Atik, Zayin Tachtenis, but it's a total different level. But namely, in the end of the day, everything goes through. It's a levush over the Yutz, Kelim, Yutzviris of Atzilus. And there is, of course, the Chesed and the Gvura. But it's not that it connects with Atzilus as the normal procedure of the Hashpah from on high to below, through the Yichud Kutshub Richush Shchite, the perfect harmony and synthesis between the two, which this world receives from, again, as we learned in detail last week. But this is a little levush of the Machiavellian, so it goes through. It just goes through Atzilus, which means picks up on the Chesed and the Drei Yamina, the right arm of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Gvura Drei Small of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's just, in the end of the day, it's the overwhelming energy of the Ein Sof. So when it manifests the longevity in this world, the bracha of Arichas Yamim B'Shanim Tevis, long days, long years, in this world, it has the full explosive energy, or it expresses itself with the full explosiveness of the Ein Sof. But because in the end of the day, it goes through. There is something which it connects one way or another, extrinsically, if you will, similar to someone stops in a certain place, but they go on. So they're actually physically in the place, but they didn't connect to the place. They didn't even leave their plane. Even if they did, it was just an exchange of plane. They didn't connect to the place. In this case, it's not the connection with the Kelim Diyut Tzviris. In the end of the day, as such, there could be brachas, but nonetheless confined brachas one way or another. But it is the total, it's an expression of the total potency, of the total bligvul, the infinite energy of the Ein Sof, and of course it just goes through the Eilam of the Kelim Yutzvidis, and therefore it does adapt to the Yamin and Smile, but the way it actually expresses itself is enormous blessing in the area associated with the Direi Yamin, the right arm of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Chesed, Oirech Yamim, longevity, Brachas Ad Bli Dai. Which is a good important point, is we learn this, that they should really open up to every single individual without any exclusion. Should have this bracha of Ad Bli Dai Arichas Yamim B'Shanim Tevis, this for without any looking for any reason. The bracha should be to everybody. And so too when it comes to Eishev Chavid, which comes to the associated with the Smeil of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's not that it connects to the Smeil of HaKadosh Baruch Hu the way it's the Kelim Yutz, the structure of the Kelim Yutz Tzviris, and then everything in the end of the day, it's blessed, but nonetheless limited blessing. But it just connects, and again externally, because it has to express itself, of course, in a physical manner. If it was just the Ein Sof itself, without connecting at all, it's like someone, whatever reason, the plane has to stop, has to refuel, or whatever it is. There's a reason why it stopped in this place, or to pick up people. There's obviously a reason. In this case, it's not that it just has to, it has to somewhat connect to something that people in this world can appreciate: longevity and wealth, and not only wealth, riches and honor from the left side of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it has to connect in a way that this world can appreciate. So it just connects to the Kalim of Yitzvidis, but not with a intrinsic and internal connection like it is the norm, but it's just to connect in order that people in this world would appreciate what a neshama beguf, a soul and body living in a physical world, appreciates. The abundance of wealth and all these brachas which come from Derei Smol of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the brachas of Arichas Yamim coming from the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore it kind of clicks, but just that it should just make sense over here in this world. But where is the bracha? The bracha is coming from the Ein Sof, and we learn about it. Yidden should have ashpa and eshev v'chaved. Every yid, as we learn about it, every yid should have this enormous abundance and be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with joy and gladness of heart. So, as again, what is evident when a person sees that, whoa, these brachas are not regular, and he feels he's able to appreciate this is the Ein Sof energy manifesting even in Elam Hazeh Gashmi, which again comes, of course, through the mitzvah tzedakah. And so with the Tiferes, which is the third midah, but again, not that regular connection with Tiferes. And so to Haid, V'Hadar, V'Chedva, not the regular connection, but it just connects just in order that when it expresses itself with the infinite blessings in Elam Hazeh, it should make sense to the individual who's living in Elam Hazeh, soul in body, invested in a physical world. And as such can appreciate, oh, these are brachas which I could appreciate. This is something which it really gives me that peace of mind, in order to serve Hashem with joy and gladness of heart and continue my shlichus, my mandate, making HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a total different manner, because I understand and appreciate that this infinite brachas which Hashem provides for me is something which is enormous, disproportionate, and so on. What is sensed, it's the Ein Sof, is the Ein Sof. It says through Tiferes and Haid and glory and dignity and or pride and glory and joy and so on. So now that window is open. But Chaz, Alter Rebbe says, the negative forces should not nourish, as we explained before, from the light and the hashpa on high, which again, wherever they're based, that they should not benefit from the light and this energy which comes all the way down into this physical world. And so too in this physical world, to shield the person and to guard the person, and to save the person from anything negative, physically or spiritually. Why would the person be harmed, as we explained before? Because one, the window is open, chas v'shalom. There's other forces which would want to tap into it, and when they tap into it, it only aggrandizes them at the Rahman al-Islam. As we saw in history, that sometimes there was a certain disproportionate disorder, and it came from, and we see the Torah itself telling the Yid, be careful, because something is going on at this time. Some window is open. And when the window is open, so the negative energy, negative force could also tap into it, and when they tap into it, God forbid, Rahman al-Islam, they aggrandize their energy, and they cause, if it's to bother the Yid, to mikatrig on the Yid, they rise to the surface, rise up to the plate in so many different ways. Rahman al-Islam. We see by Makas Pchedes, Hashem was so careful because it was precarious. Something grand was happening. And Hashem says, do something. And again, as explains in so many svarim, why did the Eibishter need the simon? Hashem doesn't know where the Yid is. He needs the Yid to put the blood on the but it's beyond, and we saw even when the Yid, whatever he was, it was such a gullus, he was found in the house of the Mitzri, that to be an extra protection to even save him, another Egyptian. The Rebbe has a beautiful word over here, how kind Hashem was to Am Yisrael, that the Yid was in such gullus, Hashem is coming to save him, and instead of staying secure in his own home, he's out there in the house of another Egyptian, and Hashem is there to save him. But it's very precarious, and Hashem had to do enormous things, which is similar to the idea. So to say, if you thought about then, that was the opening and closing the window, because there was an expression of the total infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Egypt, And thus the enormous miracles, especially that point as an example of Am Yisrael leaving a place where nobody could have left. Medrash says that even one Eved, a kind of an insignificant servant, slave, not to downplay any human being, but I'm saying it wouldn't be such a threat. Let him leave. No, he could not leave. It was so closed in and fortified. But then an entire nation of millions to leave at once. You can imagine this was a window to the Ein Sof, and even there had to be a certain closing opening, similar to what we say over here, Chas v'Shalom, the Yid shouldn't be damaged. And again, we find these examples throughout. Gave the example again of Purim earlier at this time. And in this case, because this person is appreciating this enormous blessing of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that's where if Chas v'Shalom Hashem doesn't do something immediate, there could be a chaos, but not only chaos in general, but to guard this very person, which is right now experiencing this extension of the Ein Sof, to shield him, to save him, that nothing negative should befall him. But sometimes we know that the person needs a certain shmirah precisely when things are going good, especially when he sees this in the enormity, the enormous blessing of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which he or she is appreciating. So of course they need an extra shielding, again, with this idea, because once the Ein Sof, the window of the Ein Sof is open, so it's open, and God forbid negative energies could tap in and again aggrandize himself and start harassing or bothering the individual who's right now appreciating it based on the tzedakah they gave. The Gnas Chasadim they extended, what Teda promised them, that they're going to have this entry into the Ein Sof, or the Ein Sof would connect with them, which we manifest in Elam Haz, again, because it goes through the King Mitzvidas, the Chesed and Gvura, but again, just it should only express itself in ways that the people living in this physical world would appreciate the bracha the way it is, to bring them that tranquility, that serenity, to be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Simcha V'Tuv Levav, and again, an expansion. So therefore, and again, for everything physically, in anything evil, physically and spiritually, because Rahman al-Islam, if it is no intervention or something done actively, Chas v'Shalom, as we saw it in history also, if there's a disorder, Chas v'Shalom, Rahman al-Islam, could express itself physically, but also spiritually. Not to elaborate on this. See it in history in different ways, different incidents. So therefore, the infinite light comes rushing in a way that now it's not in a way of extension, of opening, because it's about doing something in the opposite direction. So this is where the infinite light comes rushing in. But what does it do? It closes the gap, puts a scale on the gap. So what you gain is that the person has that enormous blessing, and that he feels that there's something, this disproportionate blessing, disproportionate energy, and it's reflected in all areas of life. And yet, Chas v'Shalom, he's not harmed, similar to the closure of the gap on the physical coat, puts the scale down in order that Chas v'Shalom, an arrow, should not enter into him. And in this case, it right away, it closes the window, and the person, it has these enormous, disproportionate blessings because broken in all areas of life, and yet he's shielded, he's saved, he's guarded, and him and the surrounding, Chas v'Shalom, no one's harmed. Because this is the Ein Sof V'Sivik, meaning to say this is the transcendent dimension of HaKadosh, which is truly infinite. If it's infinite in its giving, it could express itself with its infinity in its closing that gap as well. That's what Al Rebbe concludes. If it's Ein Sof, because if it's Ein Sof, okay, it's about giving. Where do you have the koach to close it? You just open up the window. No, it's Ein Sof. Ein Sof is Ein Sof, and therefore, as much as it can open, it can immediately close. Chazal tell us that it combines itself to a great calculation. So literally means every pruta. Again, there's so many pirushim, so many meanings in this pasuk. The understanding of this pasuk, in the end of the day, the more the scales, the more the person's shielded. And one of the messages is, again, in Avodas Hashem, the more tzedakah you give, the more there is these scales over the gaps, and you're saving yourself from any harm. That's one of the pirushim about Yud L'Shtaka Kashir, in the way it's expressed, not in the relationship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Am Yisrael, which is the original meaning of the pasuk. We had this in the very beginning, if you remember, in the very beginning, which is a click away, the first class on this epistle, but also it reflected something about Avodas Hashem. The more tzedakah you give, you more scales you establish, so you're shielded. So it says that the lashon is every pruta, every penny you give, combines itself to a great calculation, which means if you think about the coat, if you do close one, you're shielded if the arrow came exactly in that direction. But you close another, yet another, yet another, you're more shielded, you're more guarded. So the pasuk, the Gemara is saying, every penny you give to tzedakah, every pruta you give to tzedakah, it's another scale, it's another scale, it's another scale, you remain shielded. So it says that it combines itself to cheshbon gadol. Cheshbon gadol in this case would be, it's a total closure, no arrow can go in, because you just closed all the gaps, because you give so much tzedakah. But the Alter Rebbe says over here, there's the inner meaning of this gadol, because the only way this can work, based on the analogy of the Alter Rebbe, or based on the information of the Alter Rebbe, or to appreciate this information of the Alter Rebbe. As the Alter Rebbe said, because it's Ein Sof, it's infinite, so it could open and close. We understand why the terminology gadol, it's mitzarefes, it combines itself to a calculation. And again, calculation would be that more gaps are closed, more scales are coming in. In other words, the scales close these gaps, so the person is shielded. So why would the Chazal tell us gadol? So he says, now we can understand what gadol, because you're dealing with the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the greatness, the true greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the true purity of the Ein Sofness, if you will, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, true infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the real Gedula, and that's what make everything happen, as we just learned. Ki Gadol Hashem Ha'Ma'od Ma'od. Hashem is great, and Hashem is praiseworthy. Ma'od, as we mentioned many times, Ma'od like Ma'odcha, and Ma'od means very much, in a way that there's no end when you say the word Ma'od. And again, in Avodas Hashem, even over B'chol Vavcha, we spoke about this so many times, even recent. Especially when it says Ma'od. Actually, we spoke about this in this chapter. The Alter Rebbe has Ma'od over here. Ma'od means B'ligvul. Again, in Avodas Hashem, it's explained many times. How could you have something even greater than B'chol Vavcha? A person's ready to go Mesiras Nefesh, as the Gemara says, "Afil Neidus Nefshecha," he takes away your soul. You're still ready to love Hashem and to give and to devote yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, what could be greater than B'chol Levavcha or B'chol Nafshecha? That is, Afil Neidus Nefshecha. B'chol Ma'odcha is even greater. And we explain so many times of Chassidus, because that's a certain belief. Again is explained, and those discourses explain the V'ahavta Hashem L'kecha, or explain the pasuk in V'ahavta, the way it is similar and synonymous with other expressions in our Torah. Again, discussed namely in the discourses of Chassidus. And here also, I'm just saying this because the Alter Rebbe is saying this is the gadol. When you say Ma'od, it's b'li sabatach, it's b'li chas v'shalom, without any end, without any border, chas v'shalom. And this becomes the basis for us to appreciate this very pasuk, that this mitzvah of tzedakah, that Adam Echel Peisem Torah promises the person eats the fruit of in this world, how exactly works, because it's associated with the Gedula of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Gadol Hashem Ha'Ma'od Ma'od, which is b'li savatachos, and therefore he can open the window and he can close it to guard the person. There shouldn't be any negative consequences. What it remains is this disproportionate, enormous, blessed life. In other words, disproportionate, enormous blessings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in all areas of life, in longevity, and in children, and in parnasa, everything about chava, eisha v'chavod, may it be b'peil mamash, as the expression lamata me'asarat tfachim, by all. Have a wonderful night.